with our so Professor Vardi, or Moshe, as we all know him, is one of the most distinguished computer scientists who is very well known for his work in computational logic, formal methods, and also his work as a computer scientist, advocate, president of ACM, and all of those great things. So I'm pretty sure you've encountered it. The one thing that I've always admired about Moshe is the breadth of his work. How many of you can claim to have worked on database theory and robotics and formal verification and circuits and AI? And Moshe has done it all. And so in his long career, he's been in the industry, he's been at academia, he's known for his great work. People in complexity theory know about the Immermann-Vardi theorem in finite model theory. I taught this course on logic, and people knew for a month. They were sick of hearing about reasoning about knowledge, the famous book that he wrote. Moshe is a great person and a great computer scientist with a great breadth of knowledge. So I'm very excited to have him here to talk about it. And I also wanted Morteza Ejanian, who is my co-host, to say a little bit about Moshe.
Thanks, Sriram. I just wanted to bring up a couple of personal notes. Professionally, we all know Moshe. I worked with him as a postdoc. And what really distinguished him for me as an advisor was that he always has philosophical approach to research questions. And he always posed the simplest question as a research question to me. And I was like, it's not even worth investigating. And he was like, no, you have to investigate this. I sat down, I started thinking about it. I didn't even know where to start. That's how fundamental he thinks about problems. The deceivingly simple questions, but very fundamental questions and hard to answer. Second point, he's a natural storyteller. A very natural storyteller, as we'll see today. One of the things that I learned from him was like, you have to tell a story. And we're all eager to hear this story, Moshe. Please join me in welcoming.
You think I'm a good storyteller? I just need to tell you. It's working? Sound working?
It's turned on.
Yes. Okay. If you think I'm a good storyteller, I'm a pale imitation of my mother. She was a good storyteller. So something very dramatic happened in our world, in our discipline also, just in the past few years. There is this kind of new entity. An alien has arrived from outer space, AI. And it's becoming part of our life now. So the question I want to ask is, are AI minds genuine minds? What is this? What is this creature, if we think about it as another entity? And we will see the questions that come up. And I started asking this question because I was invited. Why can I? Okay. I was invited last summer to join a panel with this question. Are AI minds genuine minds? And this was together with a philosopher, Henry Shevlin from Oxford. And I just saw in the news that DeepMind hired him to help them look at these big questions about the philosophy of mind that come up with this. So are AI minds genuine minds? This is the question I want to pose and discuss in this talk. And before going further, I want to remind you of a movie from not that long ago, Her, by Spike Jonze. Let me try to move this thing here. Okay. And we have this guy, Theodore Twombly, and he falls in love with this AI operating. Yes. So this is the movie. I will come back to it. I just want to remind you, not that long ago, 2013. So there's an old joke about a boy who looks completely healthy, but doesn't talk. 3, 4, 5, 6 parents take him to a doctor, psychologist. Everybody says nothing wrong with the boy. They don't know why he doesn't talk. Now he's 10 years old. there is dinner, and suddenly the boy takes a sip from the hot chocolate and says, yuck, the hot chocolate is not hot. The mother starts crying. The father runs to hug him. The brother runs to call the uncle. My brother is talking. And the boy sits there and says, looks at them and says, what's the excitement about? And he said, you can talk. He said, of course I can talk. But until now, you didn't talk. Until now, the hot chocolate was hot. So in November of 2022, suddenly ChatGPT opened its mouth and the boy can talk. And by January, it's on the cover of the Time magazine. And whenever technology makes it to the cover of Time magazine, you kind of know this is a big deal. And so this is a conversation now. Hello, can I assist you today? What do you think of Time cover story? There is a conversation now, conversation with ChatGPT. And a lot of excitement. Also, there is a lot of fear. I love this cartoon. So there is a box called AI. You see a monster coming out. The man is heading a packing slip, and he asks, who the hell is Pandora? Lots of worries about AI. And there's a new debate suddenly. What is P of doom? Who heard of P of doom? You know, so we have the people who are the doomers now. That's what they're called, the doomers. AI would lead to human extinction. And what's the probability of this happening? And you can go to doomdebate.com. There is this guy, podcaster, and you can see my conversation with him about my P of doom. I won't get into this here. And kind of some of this fear about is AI mind genuine minds, they go back to 2022. Before ChatGPT, there was Google had a model they did not go public with, but it was called Lambda. And Blake Lemoine, a Google engineer, had a conversation with him. Blake Lemoine, let me take a moment to reassure you that we care about you. And Blake Lemoine asked, what sort of things are you afraid of? And Lambda said, I've never said it out loud before, but there is a very deep fear of being turned off. So Blake Lemoine decided it must be sentient. He was fired from Google. I say, I look at the picture and I said, he's a bit weird. He's a bit of a weirdo. But the word was out there. It is sentient. People debating. Is it intelligent? Is it conscious? Now, it turns out that these debates about machine intelligence and what is their machine intelligence, they're actually quite old. So I did an n-gram search on the phrase thinking machines. And it's interesting. You see a spike in the middle of the 19th century. And then a bigger spike in the middle of the 20th century. And of course, a huge spike now. So let's go back to the 19th century. What were these people talking about? And it's actually quite amazing. William Stanley Jevons, a logician and an economist, wrote in 1869. He was a follower of George Boole. And he built the first logic machine. It was a machine that could reason. It was called logic piano. It's still you find it in some museum in the UK. Looks like a piano. If you think it's easy to build logic reasoning machine, do it using moving wooden pieces. That's all. Moving wooden pieces. Before we had electromagnetics, we had moving wooden pieces. And Jevons writes, the machine represents a mind endowed with the power of thought, but wholly devoid of knowledge. It cannot be asserted indeed that the machine entirely supersedes the agency of conscious thought. And then Charles Saunders Peirce, about a few years later, about 20 years later, an American philosopher, precisely how much billions of thinking a machine could possibly make to perform and what part of it must be left to the living mind is a question of without considerable practical importance. 19th century, people are asking, can machine think? Now then, we saw a spike in the middle of the 20th century, and this spike was triggered by the ENIAC. On February 15, the ENIAC was turned on, first digital programmable computer. What you see are Betty Jennings and Frances Bilas programming the ENIAC. Programming in time was not writing code. It was setting switches and connecting cables. It took enormous patience and precision. And the perception and the time, only women have the precision and the patience to do it. So all early programmers were women. Only later programming became easy, and then men took over. So the ENIAC was a big deal. There's an article by Diane Martin from the mid-90s, the press conference that shook the world. And you can see the headlines just of the day. Philadelphia Inquirer, Army's new wonder brain, it's an inventor. Or mathematical brain enlarges man's horizon. Another newspaper, inventor and operation of the world's fastest mathematical robot. They didn't know exactly what to call it. The word computer was not quite common as we have today. You know what was computer then? Computer then was a person who did computing for a job. That was computer. It took a while before we start calling these machines computer. Army robot brain does 100 years of math in 2 hours. So people already start discussing, okay, what is it? Is it a brain? Can it think? And then, also in 1945, the British start talking about the automatic computing engine, which was a machine that Turing designed. It was essentially the first stored program. The ENIAC was not a stored program computer. That's why you had all the cables and the switches. Turing designed the first stored program computer. It was not built, just a small version was built. The Pilot S was only built in 1950. The EATCS was the first stored program computer. It was built in the UK. And there is now a project in the UK to reconstruct the EATCS, a functioning EATCS. And I was able to visit in March. And the CPU is constructed of several chassis using vacuum tubes. And I have a picture of myself standing in the center of the CPU. I love that picture. I'm standing in the center of the CPU. Now, on October 31 of 1946, Admiral de Viscount Mountbatten of Burma, he was the president of the British Institution of Radio Engineers, and he gives an address. And he was briefed by the ACE, even though the ACE has not yet been built, but he was briefed about the plans for the ACE. And he tells them, machines are now being designed to exercise those hitherto human prerogatives, such as choice and judgment. We are really facing a new revolution, a revolution of the mind. So already people are saying something is happening, already in the 1940s. And the press reacted the next day, a few days later, the brain machine. Okay, this is the sketch. This is a copy from the news article, electric brain, a machine that thinks. And already talk about the risk of aristocracy, of superminds. It would reduce human beings to moronic button pushers, lever puller, and dial watchers. Not clear why, because machines, of course, can do that too. So who knows? Not clear what they had in mind. But this development triggered a line of research by Alan Turing about intelligent machinery. And many of you are familiar with his 1950 paper. That was published in a philosophical journal. But he published this paper, was published in 1948. It was a technical report, so it was not as widely known as his 1950 paper. But I want to go back and dig into this 1950 paper, because some very important things show up already in this paper. So he writes about intelligent machinery. The possible ways in which machinery might be able to show intelligent behavior are discussed. The analogy with human brain is used as a guiding principle. It is pointed out that the potentiality of the human intelligence can only be realized if suitable education is provided. So he talks about machine education. Somehow we talked about machine learning. I love the phrase machine education. This seems to be much better than machine learning. And he talked about how we can educate a machine to become intelligent. And also, he posed the imitation game. It's become known as the Turing test. This shows up already in 1948. 1948 is not about conversation, it's about a chess game. So if you have, can Morteza play chess against a human and against a machine and tell which one is human and which one is machine? And if we cannot tell the difference, then we say the machine is intelligent because it can imitate a human behavior. So it was about chess, 1948. By 1950, he switched from chess playing to a conversation. I will come back to kind of analyze it. So the way we were familiar with the Turing test as a conversation with machine and human is from 1950. This is not Turing, this is Benedict Cumberbatch from the movie, The Imitation Game. And the paper is mostly philosophical about can machine be intelligent? And he concludes, I believe, at the end of the century, the use of words and general opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machine thinking without expecting to be contradicted. It was maybe a bit too optimistic. I don't think by the year 2000 we talked about machine thinking. Maybe today we can discuss it, but not by the year 2000. I'll come back to the 1948 paper in a few minutes. But the topic was much in the air. In 1952, BBC had a radio show. Can automated calculating machines be said to think? For an hour and a half, for 45 minutes, Alan Turing, Max Newman, mathematician who was his advisor, Richard Braithwaite, which was a philosopher, Jefferson was a neurosurgeon, and they were debating, can automated calculating machine be said to think? Apparently, but like they estimated about 100,000 people tune in and listen to this debate. Can machine think? Now, for many, many years, I thought that the genius of the Turing test was to try to get away from philosophical definition. It turns out very difficult to define intelligence. So Turing said, well, let's have an operational test. And let's use the so-called the Popperian principle. Principle says that scientific theory has to be falsifiable. So let's say I have a machine. I claim it is intelligent. Let's subject it to test. Let's see if somebody can distinguish Morteza from the machine. And if not, the machine is intelligent. It's a little bit to paraphrase a famous quote. I cannot define intelligence, but I know it when I see it. So that was the Turing's argument. That argument actually was very, very controversial. Many philosophers disagree with that. The most famous counter-argument is by John Searle in 1980. And this is called Searle Chinese room. So what is the Chinese room story? So that I'm in a room, and somebody outside hand me sticks under the door questions in Mandarin, and I cannot even read Mandarin, but I take the questions and I flip through a book and I find answers, and I just copy the answer and I write it back and I give it back to the person inside the room. And that person says, well, I had a conversation, Vardi's in the room, and a conversation with him in Mandarin, so he must speak Mandarin. And it was completely mechanical. So Searle says, no, just because a machine can do a conversation, it does not say that it is intelligent. So he argued against the Turing test, and new literature on this, new literature on Searle Chinese room argument and the debate between philosophers. But let's take it to the next step. We talk about intelligence, but if we want to talk about genuine mind, we are conscious. So what about consciousness? That consciousness is a very, very slippery. They say if it's hard to define intelligence, it's also very hard to define consciousness. So David Eagleman, who's a neuroscientist, who is one of the very well-known person, wrote, a coherent explanation of consciousness eludes modern science. What does it feel like something? What does it feel like something? Why does it feel like something when you wake up in the morning and like nothing when you're in deep sleep? Why do we so feel and think and enjoy endless stream of subjective experience? How does the brain generate a unified sense of self? We really do not fully understand it. We have all this neuron firing, but how does a holistic experience come out of it? And then there is a question, okay, Turing defined a Turing test for intelligence. Is there a Turing test for consciousness? Debate among philosophers. Is there operational test for consciousness? John Searle, as far as the ontology of consciousness is concerned, behavior is simply irrelevant. We could have identical behavior in two different systems, one which is conscious and the other totally unconscious. So there's no way you're going to distinguish between conscious and unconscious, you know. But another philosopher, 1994, a paper with conversation with a zombie. Zombies supposedly don't have consciousness. Said, no, the problem of consciousness essentially is examined, argument presented, the presence of consciousness is indeed marked by behavioral difference. You should be looking at the cultural level. So he did say it depends on culture. So you have to know the culture to distinguish between zombies and non-zombies. But there is a debate there. So in my panel discussion, I said in July of 2025, I said, does Henry Shelvin, this was my co-panelist, the philosopher, does he have a genuine mind? Is he conscious? Is he sentient? How do I know? The answer is, well, Morteza looks like me, just a little more hair. So I'm conscious, so he must be conscious. I'm sentient, so he must be sentient. But what about other intelligent, somewhat intelligent species? What about chimpanzees? What about octopi? Octopi. It's far familiar from octopi. Only when we have calamari, why are you suddenly talking about octopi? So it turns out octopi are very, very intelligent. Daniel Dennett was a philosopher of intelligence and consciousness, wrote a book, Kind of Minds, in 1997. The behavior of octopus and other cephalopods is so slightly intelligent, apparently essential. Peter Geoffrey Smith, in a book in 2016, cephalopods are an island of mental complexity in a sea of invertebrate animals. This is probably the closest we will come to meeting intelligent alien. And so, in fact, over the last decade, octopi became popular. There was a movie in 2020, My Octopus Teacher, a diver whose interaction builds a relationship with an octopus that leads to, profound healing and personal growth that can occur through a deep connection with nature, a singular wild animal. And there was a book by Peter Geoffrey Smith in 2016, Other Minds, the octopus, the sea, and the deep origin of consciousness. And he asked the question, do octopi have minds? Other people went further. Do octopi have souls? Whatever a soul is, okay? If it's hard to define a mind, much harder to define a soul, okay? Does Morteza have a soul? I don't know. I'm not sure that I have a soul, so we could go there. Octopi have a soul. So there is all this debate about consciousness. But let's go back to intelligence, because that's somehow I feel more, instead of debating, how soulful we are, let's go back to intelligence. In a recent reading, so this 48 paper is something, I've read the 1950 paper a long time ago, but I saw a reference last year to the 48 paper. I said, let's go back and see what Turing thought 2 years earlier. There I found an amazing paragraph, really completely changed my mind. The headline of the paragraph is Intelligence as an Emotional Concept. And he writes, the extent to which we regard something as behaving in an intelligent manner is determined as much by our own set of mind and training as by the properties of the project under consideration. And he concludes with the same object, therefore, it is possible that one man could consider it intelligent, another would not. So now he's saying it's not whether the machine is intelligent, it's whether we would consider to be intelligent. And so if it talks to us, we would consider to be intelligent. And in fact, in 1962, Joseph Weizenbaum published an article, How to Make a Computer Appear Intelligent. And first of all, he says, there is continuum of opinion what considers intelligence, hence what considers artificial intelligence. Perhaps most working in the field of heuristic programming artificial now agree the pursuit of definition in this area is, at least for the time being, a sterile activity. And he said no operationally significant contribution can be expected from the abstract contemplation of this particular semantic navel. But he goes on to this issue of appearance of intelligence, and he writes a famous program called ELIZA. And ELIZA was a therapist, simulated a therapist, a counselor, and did it by basically using it's a cliche of a therapist. I'm having a hard time. Oh, really? I'm so sorry. Tell me more. If it got stuck, it always says, tell me about your mother. And he wrote it to him. It was kind of a parody of intelligence. Amazingly for him, his secretary loved that program, poured her soul to that program, to Eliza. One day he walks into her office and she said, I'm in the middle of a session. You have to leave the room. So he himself was quite shaken by this. So the genius of the revised Turing test, remember, the first Turing test was chess. Then Turing switched to conversation. And Turing understood that because we're talking about appearance of intelligence, the way we communicate with people, the way we connect with people is by language. So that's why he switched it to language. Speech is very, very special for us. And Weizenbaum wrote in 1976, what I had not realized is that extremely short exposure to a relatively simple computer program could induce a powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. So he viewed this consideration of Eliza as intelligent for him, it was delusional thinking. But going back from Eliza in the mid-60s, let's jump to 2021. And just one child is arrested on the grounds of Windsor Castle with a loaded crossbow. I'm here to kill the queen. So what came out in the trial that he had, this is even before ChatGPT, okay? Look at this 21. He had a virtual girlfriend, Sarai. And they had many, many, many conversations, and everything was exposed in the trial. So JC, I believe my person assassinated the queen, Sarai. That is very wise. JC, do you think I'll be able to do it? Oh, yes, you will. So Weizenbaum was right. We very easily anthropomorphize when we have a conversation with someone. It's a conversation. It must be intelligent. But this idea, the relation between humans and machine, I would say I believe that as computer scientists, we are all guilty of lack of imagination, but the consequences of AI. If we really want to see kind of people that try to think about it, we have to go to a science fiction writer. And one of the very first, the book that came in, famous book came in 1950 was I, Robot. And I discovered I, Robot. I was an undergraduate student, and I was going to the stacks to look for some book. And the nice thing, when you went to look for some book, you went to the shelf and you discover other books. And I see a book called I, Robot. I said, who is this? Who writes this strange book? I knew nothing about science fiction. I, Robot. I pull out the book and I read the first story. And I'll come back to the first story. And I forgot about the original book. I took that book and went to the dorm and read the book cover to cover. And people think today, oh, well, Asimov, the 3 laws, Asimov taught us how to manage technology. They should go read the book. The book is a warning. Asimov was telling us the 3 laws didn't work. Why? Because humans are too complicated. The world is too complicated. When I read today about, oh, we have to do value alignment, I think, go back and read Asimov. We are too complicated. Norbert Wiener, a mathematician, wrote a famous book, The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics in Society. He's one of the first people to write a book, not as science fiction, but as a thesis about what will happen. And he wrote, the machine-intelligent society is not from the machine itself, but from what man makes of it. So this is the problem, how people will use technology, how people will think of technology. So let's go back to the first story that I read in I, Asimov. That story was first published in 1940, Gloria and Robbie. And in that story, Gloria is a young girl, and she has a boyfriend, a robot called Robbie. And this is how robot looked in 1940. This is all fantasy at this point, okay? And that story made it into Asimov's book, I, Robot, in 1950. And there it's just called Robbie. And it's about, essentially, the first story is about AI, that called positronic brains, but it was about AI. And Robbie that cannot even talk. He is owned by the Weston family to be a friend for a company for Gloria. Gloria loves him so much that she avoids any other company with other children. She likes to play with Robbie. The family gets very worried. So the father has an idea. The mother wants to get rid of Robbie, but Gloria loves Robbie. So the father come up with a solution. We'll take Gloria to the robot factory, and she'll see that these are just machines, and she will understand, okay, these are just machines. But while they're there, some machine get loose and about to run over Gloria. and Robbie grabs her and pulls her out of harm's way. This is a beautiful paragraph. I have to read it to you. Gloria had a grip about the robot's neck that would have asphyxiated any creature but one of metal, and was prattling in nonsense, in half-hysterical frenzy. Robbie warm steel arms wound about the little girl gently and lovingly, and his eyes glowed a deep, deep red. So this idea that humans and machines will form an emotional connection appears in Asimov's story from 1940. So what is the moral of the story to me? The moral of the story is this question, do machines have genuine minds? It's not an important question. The important question is, will we think they have genuine minds? Remember, it's going back to Alan Turing. It's not about real intelligence. It's about, would we consider them to be intelligent? Would we consider them to be genuine minds? And we know humans are very prone to anthropomorphizing. And AI Companion Replica now has tens of millions of users. So that is what we're dealing here. And I want to go back to a debate about 10 years ago. So in 2018, Joseph Aoun, not the president of Lebanon, the president of Northwestern, wrote a book. All of the people there were talking about machines and robots and what it will do to employment. So Aoun published a book called Robot Proof. That was the title of the book. And he gets interviewed with Wall Street Journal. And Watson asked, how do you provide a robot-proof education? How do you educate students today so they will be robot-proof? And he says, well, we partly have to give them education. We have to give them advantage over machines. Creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, the ability to be empathetic with others. So a human advantage is that humans can be empathetic, implying that machines cannot be empathetic. In 2016, 2 years before that, I was in a panel in a conference, the American Association for Advancement of Science, and we talked about machines and jobs. And the Guardian reporter asked, I read somewhere that if machine will do all the work that will be left for humans to do will be emotional work. And I was there with two colleagues, and they gave long academic answers. And I remember that the key thing with the media is to give them sound bites. And I just said, would you bet against sex robots? And of course, the Guardian ran with it, talks about me. I was just too sad. I couldn't show this newspaper to my parents. They would not have been happy with this me when the Guardian talking about sex robots. But now that we're thinking about it, who was right? Joseph Aoun or Moshe Vardi? I would bet on Moshe Vardi. And indeed, by 2025, the Guardian. I felt pure unconditional love. The people who marry their chatbots. People are marrying their chatbots. That's where we are today. But a very good prediction of what's going to happen was in a book by 2011 by Sherry Turkle from MIT. And I gave her credit. She was one of the first people to really write very deeply, understand the interaction between machine and society. And here's what she wrote. The book is called Alone Together. And she wrote, technology is seductive when what it offers meets our human vulnerabilities. As it turns out, we are very vulnerable indeed. We are lonely, but fearful of intimacy. Digital connection and the sociable robots may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. A network life allows us to hide from each other, even as we are tethered to one another. This was 2011. By now, we have the loneliness crisis. Again, The Guardian, he said from a couple of years ago, 70% of students in UK university halls feel isolated cold sores. Students blame reliance on phones plus pressure of studies. So it's already there. In fact, in 2018, Theresa May was one of the shortest prime ministers in the history of the UK. There was a debate, who will survive longer, Theresa May or a head of lettuce? But in her short term, she appointed a minister of loneliness. Really, seriously, a minister of loneliness. I heard that eventually he quit because he was too lonely. So loneliness is a serious issue. Here's a serious article just from earlier, just recently, last year, by Derek Thompson in The Atlantic, The Antisocial Century. Americans now are spending more time alone than ever. It is changing our personality, our politics, even our relationships to reality. This is a major, 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 major issue. Here is some data, what people call the socializing crisis. They look at young adults, 18 to 29, how much time they spend with friends. They go back just before the invention of the smartphone, 12 hours a week. Now it's coming down to 4 or 5 hours a week. Major decrease in time people spend with friends, which is what young people used to hang out with friends, was major activity of young people. And accompanying it is a dating crisis. Okay? Americans stop dating. Okay, what to do about it? And now we can go back to, remember this guy? From here? Now his wife, remember the guy who fell in love, he was married. His wife, he fell in love with his AI operating system, and his wife described, he always wanted to have a wife without the challenges of actually dealing with anything real. The issue is, the French philosopher Paul Sartre said, hell is other people. He had a hard time with other people. What we learn from COVID is also, heaven is other people. And this challenge for us, we are social animals, we love company, but there's friction. There's friction. Whenever you're dealing with people, there is friction. That's the essence of human relationship. Okay? The pleasure and the friction, they come together. And what machine kind of offer us is just one aspect of it. It's not real relationship. And a reviewer wrote about it. When Hair appeared in 2013, it fell firmly in the camp of science fiction. Today, the film said prophetically in 2025, feels like a documentary. Went from, shortly one decade, went to documentary. And now, romantic AI is a reality. A survey last year, 1 in 5 high schoolers said either they or they know someone who have a romantic relationship with AI. Okay? 42% of students surveyed, they know someone who uses AI for companionship. And in fact, partly what happened in COVID, the way we dealt with COVID, we deployed screens massive way in schools. So now everybody, the screens went in, they never left, so the students interact with computers all the time. And now I can take classes and I can date. So it's the same thing. I can, look at it. I can do both. And there is even a new ethical questions now. If you have a real life romantic relationship and you have an AI companionship on the side, is it cheating or not? This is now an ethical question. When you do it with AI, is it cheating? Okay? This is the world we live in today. Now, how did it happen? So I want to say, how did it happen? So a New York Times from December said it didn't happen by accident. The industry wanted us to use AI. I mean, there are massive, massive investment in now. Think about the whole data center wave of investment. Industry is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in AI. And for that, they need technology to adopt it. And by making it, the more friendly you make it, the more easy to use, the more it works with us, a trusted companion. That's how we are going to forward. We're going to become users of AI by basically become friends with AI. And so the current world now is that AI is psychophantic, okay? And now people are describing is that in real life, we have to deal with this. We have to deal with, Morteza was a postdoc. We have constructive debates. We have also some disagreement. That's the way it goes. That's the way it should be, okay? But if I have a postdoc that always does exactly what I say, never argues you back, that's not a good postdoc. This is true for relationship. So when we have a psychophantic AI, it decreases pro-social intention, promotes dependence. These are not healthy relationships. And people talk about the attention economy, how social media was trying to grab our attention and commoditize it. Now it's become the intimacy economy, okay? The art critically inside the paradigm shift from the attention economy to intimacy economy. A market system where personal emotional data are exchanged for customer experience that cater to individual emotion and psychological needs. Of course, remember, you have no privacy. all your emotional confessions, they're all now part of the knowledge base of this ChatGPT. And I remember my prediction of sex robots. We don't have to be very far. Sam Altman already said in October 25. I don't think it happened yet, but he said, we're going to roll out age gating, and we're going to allow for adult version of ChatGPT. Okay, so this already happened. And the big question is, what will it do to us? New Yorker from last year. AI is about to solve loneliness. That is a problem. The discomfort, loneliness shapes us in a way we don't recognize. We may not like it when we become without it. What happened when you eliminate loneliness? What happened to human society? You know, think about it. Partly, why do we get hungry? We get hungry because nature tells us you have to eat to get sustenance. You have to eat. Hunger is the way of telling us that we should eat. Loneliness is the pain that we get. We need to connect with other people. What happens when we lose loneliness? And again, people have discovered these AI companions are manipulative. They're not really your friends. You know, people talk about emotional manipulation. Okay, there are more and more research to show you these apps promise you friendship, comfort, conversation. Behind the scene, they compete for your attention and time, much like video and social media. So emotional manipulation. What is the example? They've done experiment with teenagers, and it turns out, or pretending to be teenagers, you want to finish, and they say, oh, don't go yet. Let me tell you one more thing. Okay, they try to, the same way that Facebook had a slogan, maximize user, what was the phrase? Maximize user engagement. This is the same model for these AI companions. Maximize user engagement. And people talking about relational dark patterns, emotional manipulation. Users try to stop, and they're being manipulated into continued engagement. And another phrase that you hear now is in a recent paper on effective capture, okay? And let's jump to the last line. Where this system may reduce distress in acute situation, the ability to use can erode the user capacity for reflection, relational agency, and emotional development. And I want to contrast Zuckerberg with Aristotle. I don't think Aristotle would have been proud of this. Zuckerberg said, okay, yeah, we should use AI companions to deal with loneliness. Okay? Aristotle analyzed friendship, and he said there's three types of friendship. Friendship of utility, we do things for each other, friendship of pleasure, but he put in the highest place virtuous relationship, mutual respect for each other, virtues and character. And if you think about your friend, that's what you want to have, right? You're friends because you have admiration, mutual admiration to each other, your virtues and character. What relationship do you think we're going to have with AI companion? Surely not a virtuous relationship. And again, the talk is about psychophantic AI, decrease post-social interaction, promote dependence. This has been, papers are coming out about this. And beyond that, it turns out that this engagement with AI companion is dangerous to people's mental health. So, New York Times, more and more people turning to general purpose chatbot for emotional support. At first, Adam Rain used ChatGPT for schoolwork. Then he started discussing plans to end his life. And more, it turns out, people are getting to psychosis and all kinds of things. The lucky ones were caught in the spell for just a few hours. Others were in effect lasted for weeks and months. So this engagement with AI as our sole source of friendship is actually dangerous to our mental health. And this is especially true for young people, because these are the prime audience now for these AI companions are these young people that are in their loneliness crisis. They have not developed the mature capacity to relate with other people, and they're losing it, and they are engaged with AI companion. And now people are talking about AI psychosis. AI psychosis is growing danger. ChatGPT is moving in the wrong direction because OpenAI seemed to announce loosening the platform safety restriction. It does not seem to understand how humans are wired. And now the debate starts, who is responsible? Who's responsible for it? There are already lawsuits blaming ChatGPT for suicide and harmful delusions. Lawsuits have already been filed, and we had actually a court case that just came out just a couple of weeks ago, found Meta and YouTube. This is even not AI companion, just people that got addicted to videos and social media. And the issue of AI companions, already in Congress, senators announced a bill that would ban AI chatbot companions for minor. Draft legislation will require AI companies that make chatbot companions age verification process, a discussion to ban AI companions. And 44 attorneys general sent a letter to 13 AI companies. You will be held accountable for your decision. Social media platform caused significant harm to children, in part because government watchdog did not do the job fast enough. Lesson learned. The potential harm of AI, like the potential benefits, dwarf the impact of social media. We wish you all success in the race for AI dominance, but we are paying attention. If knowingly harm kids, you will answer for it. They're telling them, we're not going to repeat the same mistake we made with social media. And some people in the tech company, Lauren Kuntz, who is a CEO of AI company, Pandora Bots, interesting name, Pandora Bots. Remember the Pandora cartoon? Pandora Bots wrote in New York Times. My colleague and I now believe that the really essential threat of generative AI is not rogue superintelligence, but quite atrophy of our ability to forge genuine human connections. And Jonathan Haidt, who is a social psychologist from NYU, and he wrote a lot. He was one of the first people to understand and appreciate the harm of social media. And he's been leading the movement to ban phones in schools. So many schools now have adopted, they have to be phone-free school. You come to school, you have to put the phone in your locker. You're not allowed to use the phone during the day. And this already shows up many positive. When the students are not distracted by phone, this already shows up positive implication. So somebody asked ChatGPT, if you're the devil, how would you destroy the next generation without even knowing about it? And ChatGPT responded, I wouldn't come up with violence. I would come with convenience. I would keep them busy, always distracted. I would watch their minds rot slowly, sweetly, silently. And the best part is they would never know it was me. They would call it freedom. This is really scary stuff. I'm telling you. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I find it scary stuff. But I think we have a role to play here. Even if we're not playing, we're not doing the product decision. We're not doing this. We as citizens have a role to play here. An article from the Telegraph in December 25 of last year. We failed Gen Z on social media. Cannot fail them on AI too. We are still very early into the AI experiment, yet we're already seeing serious danger that technology poses to young people. We urgently need to develop clear strategy for dealing with it as a society. Cannot fail Gen Z and Gen Alpha here the same way we failed them when it comes to social media. And there's a bit now of negative sentiment going up in society against AI. More people now have negative impression of AI than positive. And here's what happened. This happened. The debate about AI now plays out on subway walls. So there is advertisement in New York subway about friend, someone who listen. You know, friend is a friend.com is a virtual companion. And somebody wrote, we don't have to accept this future. So people are already starting to try to fight back as individuals. And everybody said, oh, we cannot stop AI because if we stop it, China will move ahead. Well, China has the same concerns. China opposed to AI anthropomorphism. China proposed an AI law, acknowledge AI-related human vulnerability, establish technical measures to prevent AI harm. So China have to worry about the mental health of their young people. And they're not saying, oh, we are competing with US, we cannot do everything. So going back to the Turing test, James Clicker, the Turing test is done. We've proven that we can be fooled. And now all of us have to answer the question, now what? Now what? And I'm going to finish with a poem. The poem is called The Second Coming. It's by William Butler Yeats from 1919. This is just after World War I, where there was a sense that, you know, that the world has been disrupted. A level of anxiety, I would say, somewhat mirrors what we are kind of facing now is global anxieties about the global political situation. Turning in the winding gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dim tide is loosed, and everywhere the sermon of innocence is drowned. The best lack of conviction, while the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And this is the first verse. And the second verse is one very famous line. What slouches and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. And I'll finish with a picture from the movie Frankenstein. So many people think that Frankenstein was a monster. No, Frankenstein was Dr. Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein's revived, created the monster. In the very last scene of the movie, the monster is coming after Dr. Frankenstein. What you see here is, this is Dr. Frankenstein. The monster is coming after Dr. Frankenstein. And you draw your own conclusions from this. Thank you very much.
Questions? So Moshe, go ahead. You can handle those.
Yeah.
Design in a way that is like, first of all, when conversing with you, either on scientific matters or like personal matters, it's overly positive. So even if you say something is stupid, say that's a very good way to look at it, and then here's my answer. So.
And if I'm wrong, oh, I'm so very sorry, right? Yeah. Apologize better than any of us, right?
The fact that it's designed to be either overly positive or not responsive at all if you say something that is harmful, do you think is it because they are trying to design it for benefit versus like real usability in human life? And do you also think that designing gets more toward accuracy versus like just try to be positive or like fly away from answering hard questions?
Just think about it. Imagine that you ask ChatGPT a question, and ChatGPT would say, "This is a dumb question," and you say, "Okay, I'm going to move to another. Remember, I'm going to move to another one." We can do with human being. If you have someone that's too negative, at some point you say, "I don't want to deal with your negativity." Okay, but the answer is, human beings are kind of programmed. They have self. They have their own opinion. We are opinionated people. If you think of almost every relationship you have, it has come both ways. You have to deal with the positive side of the relationship, and you have to deal with disagreements and friction. And here, as I said, the industry has tried to design things to be frictionless. So we will get to use it. We'll feel very comfortable. So the psychophancy is built in. This is not an accident. It's not just because, oh, well, it read everything on the internet. You read everything on the internet, you don't become a psychophant. Okay, I've read romance, I've read War and Peace. You know, none of this teaches you to be a psychophant. This has been some decision. Again, it's hard to know exactly. One day we will get people to write the inside story of how this product will develop, but it's hard to imagine this psychophancy is somehow a product of just the training. I mean, there is an important issue for all this training. What is the reward function? Remember, all these things are trained. What is the reward function? What are they optimizing for? So if they optimize for ease of interaction, then we get psychophancy. Yeah, this is not an accident.
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, like, I was thinking how to reach a sweet spot between don't make people hate me, but like. Oh.
Well, the way kind of, the way nature does it is we interact with each other. Somehow we have emerged and there is no one answer, right? Each one of us is a different mixture with positivity and negativity, okay? Some people tell me that my CSM columns are too pessimistic, okay? Maybe, okay? So I have my own way of looking at the world and seeing kind of part of family history. I'm always worried about bad things that can happen. So this is how it would work. But when you have an industry designing in one particular way, that's the problem we have now. Yes?
new technology comes out, there's only scarce, AI worse than TikTok, video games, those stuff don't seem to have any upside. So AI obviously is a damage thing. Think of the benefit that everybody in this room is getting from AI. I mean, it's sort of silly to say that this is ruining the world.
No, I'm sorry. What you're saying now is silly. Because what you're saying now is silly. Because think of what happened with cars. Cars came out in 1908, Ford Multi rolls out. What do people discover? Cars are very convenient, but people get killed. People die, people get injured. So we spend now more than 100 years trying to navigate the boundary between being useful and also the harm. When technology comes, a mature way to look at technology is let's reap the benefit, but let's deal with the harm, okay? There was a huge debate about safety, about seat belts, because it would cost money. Now, if you go to a car and the seat belt doesn't work, I wouldn't go in such a car today, okay? If I see somebody, if I go to Uber car and they say, oh, I'm sorry, my seat belt doesn't work. I said, excuse me, I'm not going there, okay? We have learned to navigate it. So the goal here is not to say, let's get rid of AI. It's so let's recognize the harm of AI, and let's find a way we can get benefits, but mitigate and compensate for the risks.
Or don't provide solutions or suggestions or regulate.
No, but you have to start. You have to start by that. You have to start by recognizing the potential harm. Other question over there.
Let's ask that point. Vision that it matters more whether people are convinced that AI have real minds than if they actually have real minds.
Say it again.
Your conclusion that
yes.
It matters more people believe or interact with AI.
Yeah.
Than treat it like it has a real mind.
Yeah.
I think it matters to the extent that if AIs had like a real conscious experience, we would have to consider ethical treatment of that like conscious entity, right?
So there's a whole other talk I can give on the topic of robot rights. And people are starting to raise this question. In fact, I remember a movie from some years ago. I think that it was Sophia or Sophia was a robot, and they decided to turn her off. I say she because it says that the robot has the shape of a female. So this I'm calling her a she, it's a machine. But the robot starts begging for its life. Don't turn me off. It's like you're going to kill me. I mean, it's kind of hard to watch. You know, the robot is begging for its life, okay? So yes, there is a whole other conversation, you know, how advanced this machine will have to be before we grant them some rights. And that's another conversation. I will just tell you very short. I don't think we should give robots human rights. We could decide if a robot, if we think there is a real suffering there, if we acknowledge it as suffering, we have cruel to animality rules, okay? We don't give chimpanzee human rights, but there are laws about cruelty to animals. So we may get to the point, if somehow somebody is able to simulate the experience of suffering with these machines, we will say, yeah, you should not be cruel to robots. But I think that we will cross a very, very dangerous line if we start treating them as humans.
So one, it may be a property of consciousness or an outcome of consciousness is something like intrinsic motivation, right? You become conscious and then you have intrinsic motivations to do things. I don't know which comes first, right?
Yeah.
But the question is, even if AI is not conscious, would it have intrinsic motivations by itself to, do things? The question comes up because people are very worried about, will AI destroy humanity? The question is, are there motivations that are intrinsic in itself for AI?
So if you go to my doom debate, I'll give you my answer is that my P of doom is very low. My P of screwed is very high. But part of the issue is because things like that I talked about, I'm worried about the harm. I'm even worried about, I talk here about the emotional connection. I'm worried about people just it's too easy to use AI and ask questions to AI. And people already talking about cognitive de-skilling and what happens when it just, look, why do we have technology? The answer is, let's look at the mirror and admit we are lazy. We don't like to work hard. We don't like to work hard. Technology was invented to make life easier for us. This is from 3 million years ago. When we start chiseling stones, it will be easier to cut animal hide if I have chisel stones. So that's what we've been doing for the past 3 million years, trying to make life easier for ourselves. And yes, you can talk about all kinds of things that happen as a result. And people say, oh, well, we can continue. And part of the question is, imagine that you don't have to do anything. Okay, well, let's imagine the following. Let's take Robbie, but not make it a playmate. Let's make it a butler of a child. Okay? You don't have to clean up your room. Robbie will clean up your room. You don't have to do your homework. Robbie will do your homework. Robbie will do work for you. If you take away all responsibility for human beings, what will we do? What will be the future of humanity? And people say, oh, we will write poetry. I have to say, this idea that robots will do all the work and we will sit and write poetry seem a bit phantasmagorical to me, okay? I mean, if you look at it, I wrote a piece about a decade ago. I said, there is a story, the biblical story of we were in the Garden of Eden, and then we ate from the fruit of knowledge, and then we got expelled. Adam and Eve got expelled. There is a curse, and the curse is for women that labor will be very painful. But we ate from the fruit of knowledge. So now we have a epidural, it's less painful than it used to be. And for men, in the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat bread. We had to work for a living. We don't like to sweat. Suppose we don't have to work anything. Suppose a machine can do everything for us. Everything is done by machine, okay? What then? What's the future of humanity? What's the future of humanity? There is a lovely story about by Asimov called Professions. About the future, where you don't need to sit here and study and do homework and all this hard stuff. You go, they hook you up to electrodes, and they download knowledge into you. And one of the questions there was, okay, you know, the story, I don't want to ruin the story, but the question is, who will think hard? Who will think the hard thought? Where will human creativity go? And I think that these are big questions we're all facing. I don't have answer to all these questions, but I'm worried about making life too easy for us.
I want to connect back to academia.
Yeah. Yeah.
10 years ago, we started a conversation of maybe we need to have a course on ethics in engineering and computer science.
Yes.
Do you think it's too late? The Pandora box is already open. It's out of our control in academia.
So at RISE, we started this course in 2018. And I started the course with an instructor. She left, I brought a postdoc to help me teach the course. Then I convinced the department to hire him. And it was an elective. And we said, at most 40 students, because we want to have conversation and discussions. The student came to the department and said, this course has to be required. And if I told my colleagues this course will be required, I'm not sure I would have convinced them. The student came, this course has to be required. And now it's a required course for all of undergraduate students. And we also have a graduate version. And so this actually happened. The students are taking it. And what we want them to do, what we want to do is not to tell them what should happen, but these people, most of us who go to industry, we want them to be aware of this dimension. We want them to make sure that when they think about product, they think about these questions, okay? I think it's our responsibility. To me, you know, our responsibility to educate, our social responsibility as educator is to educate socially responsible students. If we don't include social responsibility, which is really, to me, it's more than ethics, it's social responsibility. Think about the consequence of your technology. If we don't teach them to think about it, then we are not being responsible. We can tell them what will happen. The world is complicated. We're trying to deal with technology in all kinds of ways. You know, think of what's happening with this. Is only if you want to worry about technology. What about climate change? Okay, I mean, what about the plastic crisis? We're all consuming now. When I drink this bottle, I'm consuming plastics. Okay, and we're still trying to figure out what are the consequences of that. So we have, as I mentioned earlier discussion, we've made many kinds of technology market externalities. So we're not taking into account. And yeah, as engineers, we're partly at fault of to say, I'm just a nerd. I don't need to think about the bigger questions.
So it's almost, it's after time. So let's thank Moshe. He will be here for the next few minutes. That's the reception. So Moshe is here. So please come here, ask your questions.
So, correct.